Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time has found you? The most disturbing truths about the outer gods is not a question of fiction. It is a question of what kind of reality we're living in, and whether we were ever meant to understand it. These beings, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Shub-Niggurath, and others, aren't monsters in the usual sense. They are errors in the structure of the universe. They do not hunt. They do not hate. They simply are. And that may be the most terrifying thing of all. Their truths are not hidden because they're secret, but because the human mind was never designed to hold them. Ancient cultures tried to warn us through myth. Modern science edges close by accident. Lovecraft's stories, strange as they are, offer one of the few surviving maps. This episode will follow the trail of what these gods represent, through forgotten languages, forbidden books, collapsing identities, and the terrifying idea that the universe might be fundamentally wrong, not evil, just broken. We'll begin with how they came into being, culturally, historically, and symbolically. What forces shaped them? And why do their names still echo through literature, ritual, and fear? If you're still here, you've already stepped too close. Let's begin with where all myth begins, the need to explain what should not exist. In the years following World War I, the Western world faced an existential fracture. The optimism of reason had failed. Scientific progress had created gas attacks, mechanized death, and technologies of mass extinction. It was in this climate of broken empires, collapsing faith, and intellectual disillusion that H.P. Lovecraft began shaping the concept of the outer gods. These entities were not simply evil deities. They were metaphors for a world that no longer made moral sense. Azathoth, the blind idiot god, emerged during the 1920s, just as quantum theory and relativity began eroding classical ideas of stability. Lovecraft did not invent horror from imagination alone. He extracted it from a collapsing worldview. His monsters were philosophical. The outer gods were shaped by more than personal fears. Lovecraft's letters reveal an obsessive interest in cosmic indifference. He spoke often of a universe devoid of human-centric meaning. Unlike Satan or Ahriman, these beings are not moral opposites of good. They represent a third category, forces too vast and alien for moral language at all. This was a deliberate inversion of theological expectation. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft was not creating evil gods to fight good ones. He was removing good and evil entirely, leaving behind only appetite, accident, and entropy. This move transformed horror from emotional reaction into intellectual unease. Philosophically, Lovecraft drew from the pessimism of thinkers like Schopenhauer and the materialism of Lucretius. Both traditions question whether the universe possesses any purpose. Lovecraft's cosmic deities extend that doubt to its extreme. Not only is there no purpose, but there may be no structure, no coherence behind reality at all. Azathoth sits at the center of the universe, not as a ruler, but as a twitching, mindless accident. Yog-Sothoth is the gate, not in a religious sense, but as a totality that renders all thresholds meaningless. In these figures, Lovecraft confronts the implications of a universe governed by chance, not design. They are the spiritual consequences of physics. Linguistically, the outer gods dismantle language itself. Their names, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Shub-Niggurath, do not belong to any known system. They are not just alien, they sound like linguistic errors. Lovecraft carefully constructed these syllables to sit uneasily in the mouth, evoking something broken in speech. This was not mere creativity, it was technique. By using non-Western phonetics and layering harsh consonants, he ensured that even naming these gods felt transgressive. The result is a mythology where words don't describe but dislocate. The names act as viruses in language, disrupting clarity, fracturing sound, and suggesting meanings that recoil as they approach definition. The structure of Lovecraft's myth-building mimics ancient religious texts, but inverts their function. The Necronomicon is not a scripture of salvation, but of ruin. His citations are invented, yet delivered with academic precision. Page numbers, authors, translations. This technique, a form of literary forgery, produces authenticity through artifice. The reader senses authority even when the source is false. It mirrors how real-world sacred texts operate. Belief through repetition, not verification. But Lovecraft twists the effect. His mythos is constructed like religion, only to deliver the opposite message. Where holy books offer coherence, his texts dissolve it. They imply that even the illusion of meaning was a trap. This reveals something profound about the outer gods. They are not simply beings within the myth. They are the myth structure. Each deity embodies a principle of narrative breakdown. Nyarlathotep, for example, appears in different stories with contradictory forms and motives. This isn't a failure of continuity. It's a deliberate strategy. He is the narrative parasite. Coherence unravels around him. Shub-Niggurath is never directly described, only gestured toward through euphemism and implication. These techniques undermine not just story, but the act of understanding itself. The reader is left grasping for shape, only to find suggestion. It is horror by withdrawal. What begins as a fictional mythology quickly becomes a philosophical trap. By mimicking religious and academic forms while subverting their purpose, Lovecraft initiates the reader into a logic where certainty dissolves. Myth becomes anti-myth. Language becomes anti-language. The very structure of belief becomes suspect. This method is foundational to the disturbing truths that follow. The outer gods are not terrifying because of what they do, but because of what they unmake, meaning, identity, and comprehension itself. From here, we turn to the philosophical roots beneath their creation, the myths and metaphysics that foreshadowed their emergence. Long before Lovecraft named the outer gods, Western thought was already preparing a place for them. Ancient philosophy repeatedly returned to the idea that reality might not care about human values. In the 6th century BCE, Anaximander proposed the apeiron, an infinite boundless origin with no moral intention. This was not a god who loved or judged, but a source that generated worlds without concern for their fate. We must pause here. This idea quietly undermines later religious comfort. Creation, in this model, is not an act of will. It is an accident of excess. The outer gods inherit this logic. They are not creators in the biblical sense. They are conditions under which creation happens and collapses. Later, religious traditions tried to repair this threat by adding moral structure. Gnosticism, emerging between the 1st and 3rd centuries CE, offers a crucial bridge. In many Gnostic systems, the world is shaped not by a perfect God, but by flawed or ignorant cosmic powers. The demiurge creates reality without understanding it. Humanity suffers not because of sin, but because existence itself is misaligned. This matters. The outer gods resemble these blind cosmic forces, stripped of even the pretense of purpose. Azathoth echoes the Gnostic creator at its most extreme, creation without awareness. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft does not borrow theology. He borrows its failure. 19th century literature deepened this fracture. Writers like Arthur McKen and Algernon Blackwood explored realities layered beneath ordinary perception. Their horrors were not monsters, but revelations. McChain's The Great God Pan suggests that seeing too much truth destroys identity. Blackwood's stories portray nature as vast, conscious, and indifferent. These authors influenced Lovecraft directly, but he pushed further. Their hidden worlds still contained meaning. His do not. The outer gods mark the point where mystery no longer promises depth, only scale. What waits beyond human understanding is not wisdom, it is magnitude. Scientific shifts of the late 19th and early 20th centuries completed the transformation. Darwin removed humanity from the center of life. Astronomy displaced Earth from the center of the cosmos. By 1905, Einstein destabilized time itself. Reality no longer behaved intuitively. Lovecraft absorbed this context fully. His letters show fascination with astronomy and geology, disciplines that reveal deep time and spatial insignificance. The outer gods reflect this worldview. They exist on scales that erase human relevance. Compared to them, even ancient gods are local myths. This is not mythic, inflation, but philosophical deflation. Humanity shrinks until meaning collapses. Comparisons clarify the difference. In classical mythology, Zeus governs through personality and conflict. In Christianity, God guarantees moral order. Even in Norse myth, chaos ends in renewal. The outer gods offer none of this. They promise no justice, no apocalypse, no rebirth. They persist without narrative resolution. This is not pessimism, but ontological neutrality. Reality continues whether or not it makes sense. That distinction matters. Lovecraft's horror does not argue that existence is cruel. It suggests cruelty is a human category with no cosmic relevance. The cultural mood after World War I made this perspective unavoidable. Industrialized slaughter revealed how fragile moral narratives were under pressure. Progress had not saved civilization. It had mechanized its destruction. Intellectual movements responded accordingly. Existentialism questioned meaning. Modernism fragmented form. Lovecraft's contribution was to mythologize this collapse. The outer gods are not symbols of despair. They are symbols of coherence, failing under scale. When meaning confronts infinity, it breaks. These philosophical and cultural antecedents explain why the outer gods feel inevitable rather than invented. They emerge at the intersection of ancient doubt, theological fracture, literary unease, and scientific displacement. They are not interruptions in mythic history. They are its logical conclusion. To understand them fully, however, we must examine how Lovecraft encoded these ideas into language itself, how names, sounds, and symbols were designed to resist understanding. That is where we turn next. Language in Lovecraft's universe does not clarify, it corrodes. The names of the outer gods are not windows into their nature, but barriers to it. Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Shub-Niggurath. These are not names in the traditional sense. They are linguistic anomalies. Their sounds resist familiar etymological roots as if drawn from languages that evolved along timelines parallel to ours. This is not accidental. Lovecraft crafted these terms to feel both ancient and alien, evoking a sense of unease even before meaning is sought. The act of speaking them becomes a form of ritual violation. They signal not just what is being named, but the instability of naming itself. Each syllable disrupts linguistic comfort. Azathoth begins with the hard Aza, invoking associations with ancient Semitic roots, as in Azazel, then twists into Thoth, the name of the Egyptian god of writing. But this fusion leads nowhere stable. It suggests meaning while refusing it. Nyarlathotep uses pseudo-Egyptian suffixes, but stretches across too many phonemes to cohere. Its length alone evokes something serpentine, ungraspable. Shub-Niggurath overlays guttural consonants with a cadence that feels both tribal and technological. In each case, phonetics are used as dissonants. These are not names to understand. They are names to survive. This linguistic strategy mirrors the function of incantation in occult traditions, but Lovecraft strips away purpose. In real-world magic, names grant power. In Lovecraft's mythos, names only summon knowledge the mind cannot hold. They do not unlock, they unravel. The Necronomicon warns readers against pronunciation. The spoken word becomes an interface between human speech and cosmic indifference. Lovecraft, a devoted materialist, uses this trope not to invoke spirits, but to suggest that language itself can become a form of cognitive infection. The words do not call gods, they fracture thought. We must pause here. Lovecraft was intensely aware of linguistic theory. He read widely in philology, mythography, and etymology. His stories often reference arcane languages, Aklo, Nakal, Relayahian. These are not world-building flourishes. They are embedded arguments. Relayahian, for instance, is structured not to be translated, but to evoke linguistic failure. It appears in fragmented chants, broken syntax, impossible sounds. Fenglui mglwunaf Cthulhu Relie Wagahnaglftagn reads more like a corrupted signal than a sentence. It is syntax without semantics. This inversion turns language into terrain, something one can fall into. The deeper implication is that language does not serve humanity in Lovecraft's cosmos. It deceives. It promises access to truth, but collapses when confronted with scale or difference. The outer gods are not merely difficult to describe. They are description-resistant. Even attempts to metaphorize them fail. Nyarlathotep is the crawling chaos, yet that phrase explains nothing. Is it literal, symbolic, anthropomorphic? The ambiguity is the point. It mimics how ancient gods were simultaneously storms, animals, principles. But Lovecraft denies resolution. The terms never settle. They echo. This reflects a broader shift in literature of the early 20th century. The suspicion that language is no longer adequate to describe reality. Modernist writers like Joyce and Eliot broke down syntax and allusion to expose fragmentation beneath cultural myths. Lovecraft did the same, but through invented words rather than collapsing known ones. His outer gods embody this breakdown. They are not beings with attributes, but signifiers without fixed reference. They violate semiotics. They exist not as characters, but as semantic sinkholes. Their names are evidence that something lies beyond comprehension, and that we've been trying to name it for far too long. This is where horror enters fully. The reader encounters words that hint at meaning, yet refuse to yield it. The result is a kind of interpretive vertigo. Unlike traditional monsters, which frighten through image or action, the outer gods disturb by what they cannot be. Their names are artifacts of a failed translation, remnants of a cosmos that speaks in tones too large for the human ear. This failure of language prepares us for the failure of story itself, a technique Lovecraft will use to build entire narratives around structural breakdown. That shift from corrupted word to collapsing narrative is where we go next. Lovecraft never wrote a theology, but he built one through form. His method of myth-making, layered citations, invented texts, fragmented narratives, mirrors sacred tradition while hollowing it out. The outer gods emerge not through epiphany, but through accumulation. Stray references, academic footnotes, second-hand testimonies. There is no central revelation, only fragments that imply something unspeakable behind the world's veil. This slow emergence is crucial. It reproduces the feeling of discovery while withholding closure. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft constructs belief by mimicking belief systems, then drains them of purpose. The Necronomicon does not offer salvation or ritual mastery. It offers the possibility that knowing too much unravels the knower. The Idahai, illusion of authenticity, is key. Lovecraft's stories cite invented scholars, Alhazred, Armitage, invented universities, Miskatonic, invented archaeological finds. Yet these elements are delivered in the tone of academic writing, measured, sourced, cautious. The effect is a mythology embedded in method, not just content. Readers are made to feel they're overhearing research, not reading fiction. The outer gods are almost never shown directly, only reported by those who glimpsed them and suffered. This indirectness is not a limitation. It is the mechanism of dread. We believe not because we are told, but because the texts act as if belief has already happened. What separates this from ordinary world building is the erosion of coherence. Each mythic element contradicts or destabilizes the others. Nyarlathotep is sometimes a man, sometimes a storm, sometimes a voice. Shub-Niggurath has 1,000 young, but no fixed form. Even the Necronomicon changes, sometimes bound in human skin, sometimes a dusty folio, sometimes a Latin translation. These inconsistencies are not errors, they are the design. Myth in Lovecraft's universe does not converge, it decays. Instead of reinforcing truth, repetition deepens the void. The more we read, the less we know. This reveals something unsettling about narrative itself. In traditional myth, stories preserve coherence across generations. In Lovecraft, stories accelerate collapse. The deeper one digs into the mythos, the more unstable it becomes. The structure is recursive. New details emerge only to contradict earlier ones. This mimics the function of ancient mystery cults, revelation through stages, but reverses the trajectory. There is no final clarity, only more questions, more fractures, more implication. The outer gods are not secrets waiting to be revealed. They are the horizon of understanding itself, a limit beyond which knowledge breaks into image and madness. Comparisons to Abrahamic scripture make this clear. The Bible offers genealogies, commandments, eschatologies. It proposes moral order and cosmic justice. The mythos offers none of this. Its scriptures are fragmented, contradictory, and toxic. The Necronomicon does not explain, it destabilizes. Its knowledge is dangerous because it cannot be ordered. This is a fundamental inversion. Where religion seeks to reconcile humanity with the cosmos, the outer gods expose the incompatibility between the two. Humanity, in this mythos, was never meant to understand. The texts are warnings disguised as invitations, and yet readers persist. Scholars of the mythos, both fictional and real, return to these texts, seeking structure where there is only suggestion. This is the final, most disturbing function of Lovecraft's myth-making. It invites obsession. The more we attempt to grasp the outer gods, the more we reproduce their logic. Fragment by fragment, we assemble the illusion of coherence. But the pieces never truly fit. The architecture of the mythos mimics meaning while ensuring its absence. This prepares us for the core horror to follow. The outer gods are not threats we can name, fight, or understand. They are not obstacles. They are foundations. What they represent is not attack, but ontology. What reality is beneath the illusions of meaning and language. Having seen how Lovecraft built the mythos through language and form, we must now descend into what it reveals, the disturbing philosophical truths encoded in their nature. To speak of the outer gods is to confront truths that rupture more than belief. They unravel the conditions of thought itself. These entities embody three core concepts that define cosmic horror: insignificance, entropy, and dream reality collapse. But these are not abstract themes layered onto the fiction. They are baked into the fabric of the mythos. Azathoth, for example, is not merely a powerful being. He is the blind idiot god at the center of all infinity, where he gnaws hungrily in the dark. There is no throne, no intention, just an idiot god at the heart of everything. This is not metaphor, it is structure. Azathoth stands in for the idea that behind every law, every particle, every thought, there is no divine order, only accident. Insignificance, in this context, is not a feeling but a cosmological condition. Humans do not merely feel small compared to the outer gods. They are ontologically irrelevant. In The Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft writes that the most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. This is often quoted, but its deeper implication is rarely explored. It means not that knowledge is dangerous, but that coherence itself is fatal. Once the parts of reality align, they reveal not meaning, but a void. The outer gods are the symbolic endpoint of this alignment, what lies at the terminus of full understanding. Entropy defines their presence. Where the great old, ones are often asleep or buried, waiting for return, the outer gods persist, not in slumber, but in ceaseless, meaningless motion. Azathoth's endless writhing is accompanied by the monotonous piping of a demon flute, a music that is not harmony, but decay. Yog-Sothoth is described as the key and the gate, all in one. But this is not revelation, it is saturation. He is everything, everywhere, at once. Time, space, matter, all boundaries dissolve into his presence. There can be no narrative, no journey, no growth within Yog-Sothoth, only collapse through excess. He is not entropy as destruction, but as over-totality, the annihilation of separation. The collapse of dream and reality further destabilizes the mythos. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, the protagonist moves through shifting layers of dream worlds, encountering entities that suggest the real world may be derivative or secondary. The outer gods often reside in dream space, but they do not govern it. They are it. Nyarlathotep, who walks among men with a mocking and malicious intelligence, appears across dreams and dimensions alike, constantly shifting form. His presence undermines the boundary between perception and truth. He speaks not to enlighten, but to destabilize. Where Azathoth represents the cosmic void, Nyarlathotep embodies its communication. This trio, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, Nyarlathotep, maps a disturbing metaphysics. Azathoth is senseless origin, Yog-Sothoth is totalized collapse, and Nyarlathotep is false meaning. They do not offer mythic opposition, like Zeus versus Hades. They complete each other. Together, they form a model of a universe where beginning, structure, and language all fail in different but connected ways. It is a cosmos without hierarchy, without final judgment, without internal logic. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft is not presenting horror as event, but as condition. These gods do not intervene in reality. They are reality's hidden grammar. These philosophical concepts ripple through the stories, but they also explain why Lovecraft's horror lingers. It does not resolve, it infects. The outer gods are not meant to terrify in the moment, but to make terror inescapable in retrospect. Once understood, their presence recasts everything, from physics to thought to identity, as unstable. We can no longer be sure where perception ends and truth begins. This is not fear of the unknown. It is fear of what happens when the unknown becomes known and changes nothing, except our ability to forget. As we move forward, the outer gods must be seen not just as abstract forces, but as distorted presences with distinct properties, behaviors, and symbolic functions. Each one corrupts meaning in a unique way. The next step is to examine them more closely, not for taxonomy, but for insight. What does each god do to the stories they enter and to the minds that encounter them? The horror deepens not in their power, but in their logic. That is where we now turn. To examine the outer gods as entities is to misunderstand them at the outset. They are not beings in the conventional sense. No stable bodies, no consistent personalities, no fixed intentions. They are forces with masks, agents of breakdown that take form only long enough to unmake the context around them. And yet, each plays a distinct role in Lovecraft's metaphysical structure. They do not represent moral ideas. They represent failures of creation, of knowledge, of coherence. Each god disturbs a different axis of reality, which is why their presence feels cumulative. They do not repeat horror, they multiply it. Azathoth, often considered the central outer god, is not a ruler but a paradox. Described as a blind idiot god, he sits at the center of the universe, where the mad gods dance endlessly to the piping of a shrill, monotonous flute. The description mocks religious cosmology. This is not a throne. It is a black pit. Azathoth's blindness is not metaphorical. It signals a universe without observer, without will. His idiocy is not lack of intelligence, but absence of structure. He is the origin point of all things, yet entirely unaware. In theological terms, he is creation without logos. In philosophical terms, he is the Big Bang without a reason. That is his terror. Yog-Sothoth differs. He is not blind, but hyper-aware. He knows all time and space, Lovecraft writes, since he is time and space. But this omniscience is no comfort. Yog-Sothoth represents total simultaneity. Past, present, and future collapsed into a single entity. He does not merely see all things, he is all things. In The Dunwich Horror, he is invoked in a grotesque birth ritual that tears the veil between dimensions. He is often described as glowing spheres, overlapping in impossible geometries, symbolizing multiplicity, not personhood. Unlike traditional gods who intervene, Yog-Sothoth reveals that boundaries are illusions. His presence annihilates sequence, selfhood, and separation. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, introduces a more organic form of cosmic disruption. She is invoked, rarely depicted, but always tied to unchecked fertility. Her title evokes both pagan fecundity and monstrous multiplication. The 1,000 young is not a metaphor. It is a direct challenge to the idea that life is inherently good. Shub-Niggurath corrupts the concept of growth. Her reproductive excess, implied in swarming, unformed offspring, turns life into horror. She inverts nature's cycles. In her presence, birth becomes contamination. If Azathoth negates thought and Yog-Sothoth negates time, Shub-Niggurath negates natural order. Nyarlathotep is the only outer god who consistently interacts with humans, but even this is deception. He is called the crawling chaos, and unlike the others, he has 1,000 forms, many of them human. He speaks, he moves through cities, he seduces and destroys. But his speech is not communication, it is distortion. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, he appears as a mocking envoy of incomprehensible gods. In the Haunter of the Dark, he is linked to forbidden technology and light itself. His function is clear, to bridge the human and the cosmic, only to make the bridge collapse. He is not the message. He is the virus embedded in it. Other entities, such as Yog-Sothoth, a seething protoplasmic origin, or Dowloth, the render of veils, expand this taxonomy but obey the same rules. They are not individuals, they are conditions. Yog-Sothoth is the biological beginning, life before identity, while Dowloth reveals too much, too quickly, and burns the mind through perception. Each outer god is thus defined by how it destroys a human category: thought, time, biology, communication, perception. This is why they feel so alien. They do not threaten human survival, they threaten human structure. This structure is what Lovecraft dismantles piece by piece. In traditional myth, gods offer origin stories, explanations for why the world is as it is. The outer gods do the opposite. They explain nothing. They undo explanation. Their appearances do not expand knowledge, they corrupt it. Their rituals do not grant power. They dissolve the ritualist. This inversion is essential. These gods are not threats to humanity in the narrative sense. They are threats to the conditions that allow narrative to exist. That is their horror. And so we begin to understand how madness functions in these stories, not as a descent, but as a confrontation. The next question is not what happens when one sees an outer god, but why the act of seeing breaks the mind. The relationship between human consciousness and these entities is not merely incompatible, it is annihilative. To explore this further, we must examine the recurring figure of the witness, the cultist, the scholar, the dreamer, and what happens when that witness sees too much. Madness, in this mythos, is not failure. It is contact. In Lovecraft's world, madness is not an error of the mind. It is its final encounter with reality. Those who confront the outer gods do not go mad in the traditional sense. They undergo a collapse of internal architecture. Perception continues, but the frame that holds meaning, language, selfhood, time, fractures beyond repair. Consider the narrator of The Haunter of the Dark, whose journal ends abruptly after encountering Nyarlathotep. His words decay mid-sentence, not from fear, but from cognitive overload. Madness here is not hysteria. It is epistemological breakdown, the mind trying to interpret data from a universe that never acknowledged its interpretive tools. Human interaction with the outer gods is always indirect. No one stares into Azathoth's court and returns. Contact comes through symbols, dreams, rituals, and texts, each a diluted interface that still overwhelms. The Dunwich horror, the invisible offspring of Yog-Sothoth, is a failed hybrid of human and cosmic substance. His brief speech, echoing through the hills, "I am Yog-Sothoth. I see all. I know all," is not an assertion of power, but of incompatibility. He cannot remain in the human world without destroying it, and himself. The human form cannot contain the infinite. Madness results not from failure to grasp, but from momentarily grasping too much. This pattern recurs. Those who worship the outer gods, cultists, visionaries, scholars, are not rewarded with deeper truth. They dissolve into it. In the Call of Cthulhu, Inspector Legrasse discovers rituals invoking beings beyond comprehension. The cultists chant in unknown tongues and speak of great Cthulhu, but the knowledge they hold is fragmentary, distorted. They do not understand what they serve. Their minds are already cracked. The cultist is not a vessel of revelation. He is its byproduct. This reveals something profound. Worship does not protect the psyche in Lovecraft's mythos. It merely delays collapse by reframing fear as devotion. Dreams are another common vector. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, Randolph Carter's pursuit of a beautiful city leads him to the courts of the outer gods. But what begins as desire ends in destabilization. He finds that his dream is not his own. It has been manipulated by Nyarlathotep. Dreams, usually seen as private sanctuaries, become traps. The gods do not enter our world. They invite us into theirs through thoughts, visions, intuitions. The mind becomes the gate. This is the critical inversion. Horror is not outside us. It emerges through us. Consciousness is not shield against the cosmic. It is the doorway. Importantly, Lovecraft avoids overt descriptions of madness. His characters cannot describe, dare not repeat, or fall into silence. This technique is not coyness. It is structural. The outer gods exist beyond linguistic containment. To describe them accurately would falsify them. So the stories break down instead. Narrators use ellipses, fragmentary sentences, ritualistic repetition. These are not stylistic flourishes. They are literary symptoms of mental collapse. The text mimics the condition of the speaker. Madness is enacted in form, not just content. We must pause here. In most horror traditions, madness is punishment for sin, curiosity, or transgression. In Lovecraft's mythos, it is none of these. It is contact. The mind does not err by seeking. It errs by succeeding. Madness is not the price of forbidden knowledge. It is the knowledge. The horror lies not in what is seen, but in the realization that seeing changes the structure of the self. There is no return to ignorance. The damage is permanent. This sets the stage for the next and final thematic axis, forbidden knowledge. What happens when the pursuit of understanding becomes the mechanism of one's undoing? We will examine how texts, symbols, and revelations within the mythos act not as tools of power, but as accelerants of collapse. In this world, reading is not an act of empowerment. It is the first crack in the foundation of reality. Forbidden knowledge, in the context of the outer gods, is not hidden because it is protected. It is hidden because the human mind cannot hold it intact. There are no cosmic gatekeepers denying truth to mortals, only the structural incompatibility between our cognition and what lies beyond. In the Dunwich Horror, the Necronomicon is consulted not to defeat evil, but to survive understanding. The text contains knowledge not meant to enlighten, but to delay annihilation. This reverses the classical function of sacred scripture. Here, revelation does not save, it corrodes. Lovecraft's universe is filled with books, carvings, chants, and dreams that serve as informational viruses. They infect perception. The Necronomicon, written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, is the most famous example, but it is not alone. There is the Unaussprechlichen Kulten, the Pnakotic manuscripts, the Eltdown shards. Each contains fragments, never a complete cosmology. This fragmentation is not due to loss, but design. These texts hint at truths that undo the reader's symbolic framework. They are not puzzle pieces, they are traps. One does not gain knowledge from them, one sheds illusions. This is where epistemic collapse enters. In most traditions, knowledge builds upward, toward coherence, divinity, enlightenment. Lovecraft's mythos reverses this trajectory. Knowledge does not build, it reveals absence. In The Whisperer in Darkness, the protagonist discovers a hidden race and nearly surrenders to their perspective. But as he gathers more facts, the foundation beneath those facts gives way. He cannot reconcile the implications. Truth multiplies beyond structure. He flees not from what he sees, but from the inability to integrate it. The story ends not with resolution, but with a warning. I have looked upon the ultimate horror. We must pause here. What is truly forbidden in these stories is not data, it is meaning. The outer gods are often connected to specific rituals or phrases, but these are not keys to knowledge. They are triggers. Saying the names, speaking the chants, reading the texts, these are acts that begin unmaking the self. In Lovecraft's vision, the pursuit of truth is not noble. It is gravitational. Scholars, mystics, and madmen all follow the same curve. Approach, glimpse, collapse. Forbidden knowledge is not a locked door. It is an open abyss disguised as a passage. This inversion marks a radical departure from Enlightenment values. In the Western tradition, especially since the 17th century, knowledge is progress. Rational inquiry promises mastery over nature. But Lovecraft, writing in the aftermath of war and amid rising scientific complexity, saw no comfort in discovery. In fact, he saw the opposite. The more physics, astronomy, and biology revealed, the less special humanity appeared. The outer gods are this worldview made mythic. They represent not facts unknown, but facts that should not be known, not because they are immoral, but because they are incompatible with the cognitive schema we call sanity. The Necronomicon is central here because it fuses multiple levels of horror: linguistic, philosophical, psychological. It is written in a human language, yet conveys inhuman truths. Its sentences function as incantations and arguments. It is not evil. It is informationally toxic. Reading it does not make one wicked. It makes one aware of what should never be glimpsed. That distinction is critical. In Lovecraft's fiction, evil is a human concept with no cosmic traction. The universe is not malevolent. It is illegible. And so we arrive at a final realization. Forbidden knowledge is not guarded. It is self-concealing. The texts, names, and symbols of the outer gods do not hide truth from the world. They hide the world from truth. They produce breakdown, not revelation. And those who seek them become instruments of that collapse. From this point forward, we turn from theme to text, from abstract horror to its literary manifestations. How do these ideas function in narrative form? What stories carry the weight of these concepts, and how do they communicate them without ever speaking plainly? That is where we go next. The earliest appearances of the outer gods are scattered, indirect, and deliberately unstable. Lovecraft introduces them the way forbidden ideas enter history, through rumor, marginal notes, and secondary sources. In Azathoth, 1922, the god appears not as a character, but as a destination, a mindless demon sultan gnawing hungrily in chaos. There is no plot built around him. He exists as a conceptual gravity well. Later stories retroactively orbit this idea. Yog-Sothoth surfaces in The Dunwich Horror as something half-known, half-invoked. Nyarlathotep appears first as a poem, then mutates across prose. This fragmentation matters. The outer gods are not introduced to be understood. They accumulate through textual interference. Intertext connections reinforce this effect. Lovecraft frequently cross-references his own stories, but never to clarify. A name mentioned in one tale becomes a footnote in another. A ritual hinted at once reappears distorted later. This creates a false sense of coherence. The reader believes a system is forming, yet each addition destabilizes the whole. The Necronomicon, supposedly translated into Greek, Latin, and English, changes details each time it appears. In The History of the Necronomicon, Lovecraft lists dates and editions with academic precision, but the content remains elusive. The outer gods emerge not through narrative development, but through recursive implication. The mythos grows sideways, not forward. A clear case study appears in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, 1927. Randolph Carter's journey seems at first like fantasy. Gods are present. Quests have goals. But this structure collapses near the end. Carter learns that the gods he sought are irrelevant. Nyarlathotep reveals that the true powers lie beyond the dreamlands, in the court of the outer gods. Carter glimpses them only briefly, yet the impact is decisive. He describes them as ultimate, mindless entities which no man should behold. The revelation is not visual detail, but hierarchical displacement. Everything Carter believed sacred is exposed as trivial. Meaning is downgraded. The Haunter of the Dark, 1936, offers a more localized encounter. Robert Blake investigates a deserted church and discovers the shining trapezohedron, a crystal linked to Nyarlathotep. The god is never fully seen. Instead, light becomes the threat. Blake writes, "It was not meant that he should see." This sentence carries the story's weight. Knowledge arrives through exposure, not action. When the blackout occurs, Blake is left defenseless, not physically, but perceptually. Nyarlathotep's role here is crucial. He weaponizes modernity, electricity, urban density, artificial light. The outer gods are no longer distant. They adapt to human systems. In The Dunwich Horror, 1928, Lovecraft advances the concept further by linking the outer gods to heredity and speech. Wilbur Whately's gradual degeneration is marked by linguistic decay. His diary entries shift from scholarly to incoherent. His grandfather's final incantation, Yog-Sothoth knows the gate, is both ritual and confession. The horror is not the invisible monster rampaging across Dunwich. It is the realization that human bloodlines can serve as conduits. Yog-Sothoth's presence collapses boundaries between generations, species, and dimensions. The story reframes the outer gods as biological intrusions, not just cosmic ones. Later expansions complicate the picture. August Derleth attempted to systematize the mythos, assigning moral alignments and elemental categories. This imposed structure contradicts Lovecraft's intent. By turning the outer gods into adversaries of good, Derleth reintroduced meaning where Lovecraft removed it. Other writers corrected course. Ramsey Campbell's The Inhabitant of the Lake fragments reality through unreliable memory. Thomas Ligotti strips away even cosmic scale, leaving pure ontological dread. These evolutions show resistance to closure. The outer gods survive adaptation only when they remain unstable. Across these stories, a pattern becomes clear. The outer gods function less as plot devices and more as narrative solvents. They dissolve motivation, resolution, and perspective. They appear late, briefly, or not at all. Their power lies in how stories fail around them. This evolution, from poetic mention to structural collapse, marks Lovecraft's most lasting contribution. He did not create a mythology to be explored. He created one that resists exploration. From here, the question shifts outward. How did these ideas escape fiction and begin reshaping culture, belief, and fear beyond the page? That afterlife is where we turn next. In The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, written 1926 to 27, Lovecraft constructs a narrative labyrinth that leads not to revelation, but to unmaking. The story follows Randolph Carter, a recurring dreamer in Lovecraft's fiction, who seeks the beautiful city glimpsed in his dreams. At first, the structure mimics a heroic quest. Carter travels through surreal landscapes, encounters gods, negotiates with cats, and descends into the underworld. But this fantasy frame is gradually undermined. The journey becomes recursive. Locations echo and contradict each other. Figures shift roles. The closer Carter moves toward his goal, the more the narrative exposes its own artificiality. This structural disorientation mirrors the nature of the outer gods, who wait at the dream's edge, not as final bosses, but as the annihilation of narrative logic itself. Nyarlathotep's role is pivotal. He is not a monster in the traditional sense. He is the only one among the outer gods who speaks, who guides, who manipulates. Late in the story, Carter finally confronts him, not as an enemy, but as a cosmic mediator. Nyarlathotep mocks Carter for his naivete. The other gods are great and mindless, and wait in the outer darkness. In this moment, the framework of gods and quests collapses. The beautiful city Carter seeks is his own childhood home, an illusion built by yearning. His journey was never a path to truth. It was a lure. This revelation is not sentimental. It is horrifying. His dream, his memory, his selfhood were all instruments of entrapment. The outer gods themselves appear only in implication. They dance idiotically around Azathoth, whose name no lips dare speak aloud, yet their influence permeates the story. Carter is warned repeatedly not to disturb their court. The climax, when he approaches them, becomes an anti-climax, a sudden inversion that denies spectacle. The horror is not what Carter sees, but what he nearly sees. The closer he comes to knowledge, the more the story strips away resolution. This is the essence of outer god horror. Not confrontation, but collapse before confrontation. We must pause here. Dream Quest functions as a map of Lovecraft's metaphysics disguised as fantasy. Every world Carter visits bends away from coherence. Kadath, the mountain of the gods, is unreachable. The gods of earth are weak, fleeing from something beyond comprehension. The ghouls, moon beasts, and night gaunts populate a dream world governed not by desire, but by entropy. Carter believes he is a protagonist. Nyarlathotep reveals he is a puppet. The outer gods do not oppose him. They include him. The dreamer does not wake. The dream reabsorbs. Formally, the story mimics its content. Unlike Lovecraft's tighter tales, Dream Quest meanders. It loops, digresses, and dwells on landscapes more than action. This frustrates readers expecting momentum. But the structure is the horror. It builds a world without climax. The quest archetype is hollowed out. Instead of a prize, Carter receives a recursive truth. His longing for home was manipulated by forces that speak not in riddles, but in architecture. The entire dream was Nyarlathotep's trap. The story ends not with revelation, but with a return, unearned, uncanny, unresolved. The implications stretch across Lovecraft's larger mythos. Carter, in earlier tales, dabbled in forbidden texts and occult rituals. In Dream Quest, he faces the consequence of seeking too far. His journey mimics that of the reader encountering the outer gods, beginning with curiosity, moving through awe, ending in epistemic reversal. the city is found, but meaning is lost. This reversal is what Lovecraft refines in later works. Knowledge does not reward. It rearranges the self. The outer gods do not appear. They happen. As a case study, the dream quest of unknown Kadath demonstrates Lovecraft's shift from traditional horror to metaphysical fiction. The outer gods act not within the plot, but upon it. They reshape narrative into disorder. Their influence is not violence, it is form. From here, the next case must narrow the frame. If Dream Quest is cosmic myth, then the Haunter of the Dark is intimate dread. The outer gods will move from dream to light, from metaphor to manifestation. In The Haunter of the Dark, 1935, Lovecraft distills the terror of the outer gods into a single object, the shining trapezohedron. The story follows Robert Blake, a writer and occult enthusiast who becomes obsessed with a boarded-up church in Providence. Inside, he discovers relics of a forgotten cult, a hidden room, and the black crystal artifact said to summon an entity known only as the Haunter of the Dark. This entity, implied to be an avatar of Nyarlathotep, never appears fully on the page. Instead, it exerts influence through suggestion, through dreams, electrical failures, and inexplicable fear. The horror builds not from what Blake sees, but from what he begins to understand too late. The shining trapezohedron is key. It is described as a window to all of space and time, a prism through which the viewer may glimpse the black gulfs beyond the universe. Unlike the Necronomicon, which conveys danger through language, this object bypasses language entirely. It is not read, it is seen, and that act of seeing is irreversible. Lovecraft writes, "He had looked upon the unknown, and now it looked back." The phrase is deceptively simple. It signals a complete inversion. Human curiosity triggers not revelation, but exposure. Blake is no longer an observer. He has become visible to something that should not perceive. The role of Nyarlathotep here is more intimate than in the dream quest of unknown Kadath. There he operated as a manipulator of worlds. In Haunter, he functions as a contagion, slipping into our dimension through a technological conduit. The crystal is activated by light, and the being it summons cannot emerge in darkness. This paradox, light as danger, darkness as sanctuary, reverses natural associations. Blake, a seeker of hidden truths, finds that illumination is fatal. The outer god is not summoned through malice or ritual intent. It arrives because someone looks too closely. As Lovecraft puts it, he had dared to open the gate. Importantly, Blake never fully understands what he has unleashed. His descent is documented through journal entries that deteriorate in clarity. As with other Lovecraft protagonists, the closer he approaches comprehension, the more language breaks down. The final passage is fragmented, written in desperation. "I see it, coming here, hell wind, Titan blur, black wings, Yog-Sothoth, save me, the three-lobed burning eye." This last phrase, three-lobed burning eye, is never explained. It becomes one of Lovecraft's most cryptic symbols. Some interpret it as a literal feature of the god, others as a metaphor for insight so intense it annihilates the mind. The ambiguity is essential. The story closes with a glimpse that does not clarify, only deepens the dread. The narrative structure mimics epistemic failure. Blake's investigation begins methodically, with research into the church and its occult history. But as he collects more information, certainty dissolves. Each discovery raises more questions. The cult's motives are unclear. Their fate is hinted at, but never confirmed. The being they worshipped remains unnamed until the final lines. This structure mirrors how knowledge behaves in Lovecraft's mythos, not as accumulation, but as erosion. Each new piece of data subtracts coherence from the whole. This story also shows Lovecraft's increasing ability to anchor cosmic horror in the mundane. The church is not in Arkham or Innsmouth. It's in a recognizable city modeled after real-world providence. Blake is not a medieval scholar or otherworldly dreamer. He is a writer, curious, articulate, living in modernity. The outer gods here are not buried beneath aeons. They are one glance away. This closeness sharpens the horror. If DreamQuest mythologizes the vastness of the outer gods, Haunter reveals their proximity. They don't have to arrive. They are already here, waiting to be seen. What the Haunter of the Dark achieves, then, is a compression of Lovecraft's entire cosmic vision into a personal, doomed encounter. The outer god is not described, only gestured toward. Its effects are not global, but surgical, targeting one man through one moment of forbidden perception. It is a parable of epistemic trespass, the idea that knowledge can be not just dangerous, but fatal. From this point, the question becomes broader. What happens when these ideas escape Lovecraft's control? When later writers and artists begin to reshape the outer gods for new mediums, ideologies, and audiences? That evolution is what we examine next. After Lovecraft's death in 1937, the mythos of the outer gods did not fade. It metastasized. His correspondents and literary heirs, particularly August Derleth, began codifying what Lovecraft had deliberately left chaotic. Derleth's most significant intervention was moral taxonomy. He proposed a dualistic framework, the outer gods as evil, elemental forces, opposed by a good pantheon of elder gods. Yog-Sothoth became fire, Nyarlathotep air, Shub-Niggurath earth, and so on. But this structure directly contradicts Lovecraft's core philosophy. In Lovecraft's stories, the outer gods are not evil, they are indifferent. Derleth reintroduced a theological structure that Lovecraft had spent his career dismantling. This misinterpretation reshaped the mythos for decades. Derleth's stories, such as The Lurker at the Yitu-Iyin Threshold, 1945, expanded the roles of the outer gods but grounded them in binary oppositions. Azathoth became a cosmic adversary, not an idiot engine of unreason. These changes made the mythos more accessible, but less disturbing. The horror shifted from philosophical collapse to good versus evil narratives. Derleth's Necronomicon warned against moral trespass rather than epistemic excess. In effect, he domesticated the outer gods, turning incomprehensible forces into familiar threats. Later writers resisted this framework. Ramsey Campbell's contributions in the 1960s and 70s returned the mythos to ambiguity. His outer gods, such as Ihort and Yigolonak, operate through suggestion and psychological intrusion. They are never fully described. Campbell emphasized mental instability over moral judgment. In The Inhabitant of the Lake, 1964, reality itself bends as the protagonist investigates a being that can only be approached through dreams. The horror arises not from malevolence, but from being perceived. This recenters Lovecraft's original insight. Horror begins when comprehension fails. Thomas Ligotti took this further, rejecting even the pretense of cosmic scale. His outer gods are barely named, barely embodied. In the last feast of Harlequin and Nethyscurial, the divine is indistinguishable from existential dread. Ligotti's cosmos does not need Azathoth. Reality itself is the error. He writes, "There is no ground beneath our feet." only the dream of ground. The influence of Lovecraft is clear, but filtered through pessimistic philosophy and postmodern form. Ligotti collapses the mythos inward. The gods do not destroy the world. They are the world, revealed as something senseless, sick, and already broken. In popular media, the outer gods continued to evolve. Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, 1981 to present, systematized Lovecraft's entities into stat blocks, rituals, and spell effects. While this made the mythos interactive, it also translated cosmic horror into manageable gameplay mechanics. Yog-Sothoth could be summoned. Azathoth could be banished. These adaptations democratized the mythos, but risked trivializing it. The unknowable became quantifiable. Yet paradoxically, this also spread the outer gods into new cultural spaces. They became symbolic shorthand for inhuman knowledge and systemic collapse. Other writers, Caitlin R. Kiernan, Laird Barron, Brian Evanson, have returned to Lovecraft's roots, exploring horror as epistemological instability rather than spectacle. Kiernan's work, in particular, invokes entities that echo outer gods in form and function, ancient, indecipherable, physically and mentally corrosive. In The Drowning Girl, characters encounter visions that fracture identity and destabilize reality, not through violence, but through too much information. These later expansions treat the mythos not as a canon to extend, but as a contagion to reinterpret. The outer gods survive precisely because they resist containment. We must pause here. The mythos, unlike a typical fictional universe, does not cohere through internal consistency. It coheres through thematic contagion. The outer gods persist across decades not because of strict mythology, but because they offer a flexible grammar for articulating a specific kind of dread. Whether in pulp fiction, literary horror, or interactive media, their function remains the same: to collapse the boundary between human meaning and cosmic indifference. From here, the question shifts once more. Having traced their evolution across texts, we now turn to their intrusion into the real, into folklore, sightings, belief systems, and digital hoaxes. That intrusion marks the beginning of their cultural afterlife. The outer gods have long since escaped Lovecraft's fiction. Today, they move through culture like background radiation, diffuse, hard to trace, yet persistently present. Their names surface in Reddit threads, about cursed audio, in YouTube videos claiming to have recorded the sound of Azathoth from deep space microphones, in online ARGs where players descend through layers of fictional madness that eerily mirror mythos logic. These aren't direct adaptations, they are echoes. The mythos has become a kind of modern folklore, shared not through belief, but through performance. The outer gods now operate like urban legends, not quite believed, never entirely dismissed. Consider the recurring online myth of the heartbeat of Azathoth, a low rhythmic hum supposedly captured by astronomers from distant pulsars or the cosmic microwave background. The claim is always unverifiable. The source file, if it exists at all, is corrupted or removed. But users share spectrograms, quote Lovecraft, and connect it to feelings of dread and sleep paralysis. Whether hoax, art project, or collective hallucination, the result is the same: myth as participatory fiction. The outer gods persist because they invite interaction, not through worship, but through interpretation. People want to test the edge of the unknowable, even if only through a hyperlink. The Necronomicon has undergone a similar transformation. First appearing as a fictional text, it has since been published in numerous real editions. most famously the Simon Necronomicon of the 1970s. Though widely dismissed as a pastiche of Sumerian mythology and occult tropes, it was taken seriously by some occult circles. Forums, blogs, and ritual groups sprang up around its use. What matters here is not authenticity, but function. The book became a conduit for altered states, just as Lovecraft described. The outer gods, once literary symbols, now occupy the space of spiritual experimentation. They have become useful fictions, frameworks through which some choose to explore the irrational. Hoaxes and myths bleed into media. YouTube creators fabricate lost tapes that prove government contact with Yog-Sothoth. TikTok videos stage haunted rituals under Arleyehian hashtags. RG creators design labyrinths of false documents, ancient alphabets, distorted audio, all in the spirit of the mythos. The result is a kind of gamified paranoia where players willingly lose track of what is real. This is not simply entertainment. It speaks to something deeper, a cultural suspicion that behind the screen, behind the algorithm, something vast and indifferent watches back. The outer gods are the perfect metaphor for systems too large to grasp: technological, political, cosmic. We must pause here. These myths do not persist because people think they're true. They persist because people want them to be almost true. In a disenchanted world, where every mystery is flattened by explanation, the outer gods offer a final frontier of conceptual dread. They are not haunted houses. They are haunted ideas. They thrive on ambiguity. In a digital landscape obsessed with clarity, such ambiguity becomes magnetic. The etul, suggestion that something remains unknowable, unseeable, unnameable, is no longer terrifying. It is desirable. This reflects a universal human tension. We crave knowledge, but we fear its cost. The outer gods symbolize what happens when that cost exceeds what we can bear. Their presence in modern myths, hoaxes, and real sightings is not about literal belief. It is about symbolic function. Azathoth at the center of the universe becomes a stand-in for meaninglessness at the center of modern life. Nyarlathotep becomes a metaphor for mediated deceit. Yog-Sothoth becomes a personification of total surveillance. These aren't just characters. They are conceptual tools for thinking about what exceeds thought. And yet, the implication remains open. Every myth has believers on the margins. Every hoax has a few who never stop digging. The outer gods invite that behavior. They're not designed to be solved. They're designed to linger. Their afterlife is not a question of truth, but of infection. Ideas that warp other ideas. Names that twist language. Stories that fracture coherence. From here, we turn to the larger cultural systems that have absorbed them: film, games, subcultures, and academic theory. The mythos has left folklore. Now it enters the marketplace. The outer gods have entered modern media not as characters, but as atmospheres. They do not appear directly in most adaptations. Instead, their logic infects the structure of films, games, and music. This is not due to oversight. It's a condition of their design. Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, and Nyarlathotep cannot be portrayed accurately, because to portray them would be to reduce them. Their horror lies in scale, not spectacle. This is why the most successful representations of the outer gods are indirect. They haunt form, not frame. The more a work tries to show them, the less it can preserve their meaning. In cinema, examples abound. The Void, 2016, presents cultists opening a gateway to a dimension, ruled by faceless, multiplying gods. Their motives are opaque. The result is mutation, not revelation. The Mist, 2007, adapted from Stephen King but steeped in Lovecraftian logic, traps characters in a fog filled with creatures that appear biological but operate beyond understanding. There is no origin, no containment. The horror is epistemic. Similarly, Event Horizon, 1997, avoids direct reference but delivers outer god logic. A ship opens a gateway to another universe, and what comes through cannot be explained, only felt, suffered, or silenced. These films succeed because they mimic mythos principles: distortion, fragmentation, withdrawal. In games, the outer gods have been adapted more literally, but with varying degrees of success. The Call of Cthulhu RPG, 1981 to present, allows players to investigate cults, summonings, and unnameable truths. Madness is a mechanic. Knowledge erodes sanity. This captures Lovecraft's central equation: awareness equals collapse. More recently, Bloodborne, 2015, channels outer god horror through dream logic and cryptic lore. The game's world is governed by ancient, non-human intelligences. The player ascends through insight, only to realize that insight is infection. Great Ones, the game's equivalents of outer gods, cannot be defeated. They can only be seen, and seeing is enough to destroy meaning. Even music has absorbed these structures. Ambient horror albums like Cryo Chambers' Nyarlathotep or Black Mountain Transmitters' Playing with Dead Things build soundscapes designed not to evoke emotion, but to unsettle cognition. Drone, distortion, and repetition simulate the effect of ritual or invocation. Lyrics, when present, are indecipherable or corrupted. This is not atmosphere for storytelling. It is the story. The listener becomes the site of distortion. Music becomes an auditory analog of the Necronomicon, suggestive, fragmentary, and corrosive. What unites these examples is their structural alignment with cosmic horror's core ideas. The outer gods cannot be reduced to villains or monsters. When they are treated as such, given bodies, motives, weaknesses, they become conventional. The most effective adaptations understand this. They preserve the god's narrative function, to destabilize. The goal is not confrontation, it is contamination. The film The Endless, 2017, for instance, features a nameless, godlike entity that traps characters in time loops for its own inscrutable purposes. It is never shown, only implied. Its presence is felt through logic failure. Time breaks, space bends, memory distorts. That is how an outer god acts. This approach explains their persistence. The outer gods are adaptable not because they are flexible, but because they are formless. They survive genre shifts by remaining conceptual. They are not mythological artifacts. They are narrative disruptors. They infect through theme, not design. This is why they reappear in places never named. Lovecraftian, experimental horror, cosmic science fiction, analog horror YouTube series. They don't require invocation, only suggestion, and yet the adaptations are never final. The outer gods refuse closure. Each portrayal opens a new gap. Each work becomes another vector of transmission. This is their success and their threat. As long as stories seek to confront the unknown, the outer gods will re-emerge, not as content, but as distortions in the content. Their most terrifying quality is that they do not end. They recur, not in sequels, but in failures to forget. The question is no longer whether they can be adapted. It is whether any adaptation can leave them behind. The outer gods have not only permeated fiction, they have been absorbed into subcultures, spiritual frameworks, and academic discourse. In each case, their function shifts slightly, but their core effect remains. They destabilize systems by entering them. In occult subcultures, particularly those influenced by chaos magic and postmodern esotericism, the outer gods are treated not as fiction, but as functional symbols. Practitioners invoke Nyarlathotep or Yog-Sothoth in ritual, often not as literal deities, but as archetypes of madness, entropy, or anti-structure. The Simon Necronomicon catalyzed this trend in the 1970s, presenting the outer gods as ancient Mesopotamian forces. Though largely discredited as a fabrication, it proved one thing: these entities could migrate into living belief systems. In chaos magic, where belief is seen as a tool rather than a truth, the outer gods offer ideal material. They are sufficiently amorphous to evade dogma, yet emotionally potent enough to serve an altered state work. A practitioner might meditate on Yog-Sothoth not to summon a being, but to dissolve boundaries of time and self. The god's indifference becomes liberating. Their horror becomes utility. This inversion, using fictional cosmic entities as tools of consciousness, exploration, mirrors Lovecraft's own irony. He crafted myths to express meaninglessness. Others have turned them into meaning machines. In academic circles, the outer gods have found new life through critical theory. Scholars of speculative realism, object-oriented ontology, and posthumanism often cite Lovecraft as a precursor. Graham Harmon, for example, describes Lovecraft's monsters as hyper-objects, things that exist on scales we cannot comprehend. The outer gods embody this concept perfectly. Azathoth is not just a god, he is an event too large to witness. Yog-Sothoth is not a figure, he is a metaphor for systems that totalize experience without yielding to it. Academic writers use these entities to discuss capitalism, climate change, AI, anything that seems too large, too complex, too alien to grasp directly. These interpretations preserve the gods' core feature, their resistance to framing. Even when appropriated for ritual or theory, they retain a contaminating ambiguity. Subcultures that worship them rarely form stable traditions. Academic theories that deploy them often spiral into recursive abstraction. The outer gods destabilize from within. Their mythic function continues, not to be absorbed, but to unravel what absorbs them. Like memes with no stable payload, they replicate through distortion. Even internet subcultures reflect this pattern. Ironic worship of Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep proliferates in memes, avatars, and usernames. What began as satire, mock prayers to Azathoth, Lovecraftian tarot cards, becomes harder to distinguish from earnest engagement. Some online communities treat the mythos with the same sincerity as esoteric traditions. Others blend it with conspiracy theory, treating the outer gods as metaphors for real-world control systems. In both cases, the gods are no longer confined to fiction. They function as tools for cultural interpretation. Whether used to express existential dread or digital age, paranoia, their forms remain malleable. This reflects a deeper truth. The outer gods thrive where certainty breaks down. They are not so much believed in as inhabited. People enter their logic and find it useful. Their indifference matches late modern anxieties. Their incomprehensibility mirrors the experience of navigating fractured digital, political, and ecological realities. They do not demand faith. They exploit attention. And attention, once given, does not return unchanged. As we move into the final turn, toward the psychological and philosophical consequences of the outer gods, we must ask not whether people believe in them, but why they continue to act as if these entities explain something essential. What is it about the outer gods that continues to resonate, even mutate, across such different systems of thought and expression? The answer may lie less in horror than in recognition, a sense that they reveal something we already suspected, something we hoped would stay buried. The outer gods endure because they articulate what modernity cannot resolve. In a world increasingly stripped of cosmic certainty, psychological stability, and narrative coherence, entities like Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth become symbols of truths too large and too empty to be held directly. They are not monsters, they are metaphysical mirrors. Azathoth represents not evil, but origin without intent. Yog-Sothoth embodies not omniscience, but total simultaneity that nullifies perspective. Nyarlathotep speaks not to reveal, but to disassemble. These are not gods in the traditional sense. They are conditions. Their presence is not an event. It is a diagnosis. Psychologically, they speak to the limits of identity. Lovecraft's protagonists rarely face bodily harm. They face epistemic dissolution. Exposure to the outer gods strips away self-definition, what one knows, believes, remembers. The horror is not death. It is survival without continuity. When Robert Blake sees Nyarlathotep in The Haunter of the Dark, he doesn't scream in fear. He writes gibberish. His final perception, the three-lobed burning eye, is not an image. It is a rupture. This is what the outer gods leave behind, shattered models of meaning, not corpses. Philosophically, their implications are corrosive. They dismantle anthropocentrism, moral teleology, and metaphysical comfort. If Azathoth lies at the center of the universe, blind and idiotic, then existence is not tragic or comic. It is null. The familiar narratives collapse. There is no progress, no revelation, no closure, only endless recursion, entropy, or involuntary awareness. This is why Lovecraft's universe remains disturbing, even when the story ends. The monster doesn't need to win. The monster is the world. This horror is difficult to articulate, yet familiar. In the 21st century, individuals routinely encounter systems too vast to influence: ecological collapse, algorithmic governance, financial abstraction. These systems behave like outer gods, distributed, unknowable, indifferent. The dread they evoke is not immediate fear, but long-term erosion of agency. The outer gods persist not because they are supernatural, but because they capture the feeling of living within structures we can perceive but not comprehend. Their mythic qualities echo real psychological conditions: derealization, disassociation, cognitive overload. Even in secular frameworks, the outer gods function as metaphors for theological absence. In previous eras, divine silence created existential anxiety. Today, we suspect there was never anything to hear. Azathoth is that suspicion-made myth. He does not speak because he cannot. He does not judge because he does not know. The universe doesn't reject us. It never noticed. This is a distinctly modern form of despair. Not punishment, but irrelevance. The cosmic horror here is not that we are wrong, but that there is no scale against which to measure rightness at all. And yet, there is no final message. Lovecraft's stories never end with resolution. Neither do the outer gods. They linger in possibility. Their power lies in suggestion, what they imply but never confirm. This is why they remain useful. They refuse closure. They resist domestication. They remain abstract enough to mutate across disciplines, yet precise enough to invoke specific dread. They are not answers. They are disruptions, endless reminders that knowledge has edges and that what lies beyond is not evil or divine, but simply there. So where does that leave us? perhaps with a final, unsettling thought. The outer gods are not waiting to arrive. They are already here, embedded in the logic of systems, ideas, and stories we no longer control. Their names change, their forms adapt, but their function remains to show us what thought cannot survive. And still, we look, we listen, we ask, because the most disturbing truth of all may not be that the outer gods exist, but that we need them to.